Welcome to Cardinals Cover 2 with Craig Grialou and Mike Jurecki. Cardinals Cover 2 is brought to you by Arizona Cardinals Podcasts. Visit azcardinals.com/podcasts. From the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center, here's Craig Grialou and Mike Jurecki.
Happy 2019. Here's hoping the new year is better than the old year. You have a new year?
I did have a good New Year. Nice and quiet.
There, that's the way to do it.
Actually, it's become amateur hour, and I'm sure a lot of people like to go out and have a good time.
It's a heck of a lot safer to stay indoors.
But I did cheat, though. I actually watched the ball drop, I want to say.
No. That's not cheating because I do it every year.
10 p.m. our time, which is midnight there.
Once the ball drops, it's officially 2019. You can go to bed.
And I did.
The only time, a quick aside, when we switched the from 1999 to 2000, the Y2K, all the worries about, the world was going to end, I actually did stay up until midnight then, just to make sure.
You know where I was?
All the clocks and computers and everything.
For 2 days, Appleton, Wisconsin.
That's right. I do remember that. I remember the stories.
Yeah.
So
Thomas Burke was playing the guitar in the lobby.
See, now you have a story after
played
that
in
trip.
Wisconsin, and he was a country boy. No, it was, listen, you're covering the Packers and Cardinals game, but they were concerned that the planes were going to,
fall out of the skies.
Yes,
exactly. I remember all of that stuff. And you know what happened? Nothing.
Well, you got to be prepared for that
Of
stuff.
course.
That's the 5 Ps. Proper planning prevents poor performance.
Okay.
Those are the 5 Ps. You got to make sure you cover your tracks.
All right, exactly.
Now,
and you know what? It's better to, what's that, Murphy's Law? If you plan for something, then it's never going to happen. But if you don't, then that's when.
Yeah. Life's about timing.
Exactly.
But Happy New Year. I am excited and optimism and hope going into the offseason.
Those are the 2 key words so far in 2019, hope and optimism, as we take off on this Wednesday here from the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center. Here's what's ahead on the show today. The Cardinals coaching search is in its first stage. We've got the latest on who is on the radar. Chandler Jones makes his biggest play of the season at the end of the season. The first roster moves of 2019 have been announced. And, of course, your questions via social media using the hashtag CardsCover2. Hashtag CardsCover2. We'll do that a little bit later on in the show here. But first, the news of the day, and really it's the news of the week. Steve Wilks is no longer the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. But before we move forward, let's look back. And for those that might have missed our special edition of Cards Cover 2 on Monday, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve day on December 31st, the decision to let Wilks go, here's team president Michael Bidwell.
So when you look at not only the record, but the lack of competitiveness, the fact that we went backwards on offense and defense, looking at his plan for 2019, I just didn't feel like it was a plan that I wanted to get behind that would turn us around and get us back to the type of football that we expect and that our fans deserve. It was a cumulative effect and as we went on, but I wanted to make sure I gave him the whole season every opportunity to turn around because I thought it was most fair to him. You saw from the very beginning, even when we had a healthy squad, the first 2 games we were outscored 58-6, and so I had some concerns at the very beginning.
Lack of competitiveness. Those 3 words in some form or fashion was mentioned a handful of times during the press conference, and we talked about it even before the news became official, just on how uncompetitive this team was in the 13 losses, 9 by double digits, 5 by 20 or more, 3 by 30 or more. And if we're talking about it, MJ, and fans are talking about it, then you better believe the team president is aware of it as well. And mentioning even going back the first 2 weeks, which, I kind of looked at it in totality, but him mentioning losing to Chicago, losing to the Rams. Now, losing to the Rams is one thing, but just the margin of defeat, that's eye-opening, eye-catching, if you will, and certainly something that the Cardinals could not stand going forward.
Yeah, and his reference was the first game against the Redskins, and, we talked about it earlier on the Red Sea Report with Bertrand Berry and yourself. is I thought Steve Wilks made a huge mistake as a rookie head coach when he announced to the world that they were going to run the football. I get that. But the Redskins beat us at their own game. play action, which we were hoping that we'd see from Bradford. He wasn't going to succeed in that offense under Mike McCoy. And then Adrian Peterson, they couldn't stop the run. I mean, I didn't give him a chance in week 2. I thought, maybe they can keep it close. The Rams rested a lot of their players in the preseason, but I think the Raiders game could be like the nail in the coffin. That Broncos game when they fired McCoy the next morning, I give them credit. You look at the Bears game, the Seahawks game, the Raider game, and the Seahawks game. They lost by a total of 10 points?
8 points.
8 points. Now, going to Green Bay, that was a good win. Maybe they weren't playing for the head coach, but hey, they can't control that atmosphere, and they went up there in inclement weather. But yeah, body of work. This is a production business, and I'm glad Michael mentioned that when he did have a conversation with Steve Wilks, and he wanted to know his plans for 2019. I got to assume he's going to say, I'm going to change my coaching staff, because now when we look back, and you have the numbers to back it up, it was a very inexperienced coaching staff. And so here Michael's trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, but obviously he didn't like what he was hearing, and just making changes on the coaching staff was not going to be enough.
Yeah, just the number of first year, whether it's first-year head coach, first-year offensive coordinator when Byron Leftwich went in and replaced Mike McCoy, first-year defensive coordinator. There were 12 first-year coaches on this staff, either at their current position or just their first-ever experience at the NFL level. And you add all that up, and then you wonder why this team wasn't competitive, because you have to give yourself a chance in the fourth quarter. Too many times when you get late in ball games and you're within a field goal, a touchdown, 2 possessions, even with 10, 11 minutes to go in the ball game, there's still plenty of time. But too many times we were going into the fourth quarter, and you'd be looking down on that field, or you're watching from the comfort of the studio, or fans from their own home, and the game's over. And there is literally no chance at a comeback. And too many times, a lot of us, I believe, felt that way watching this team perform.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be redundant, but it's worthy of mentioning again. I think the league is set up for teams that get high draft picks, and obviously when you have high draft picks, that means you're probably coming off a disappointing year, unless you're trading your top players like the Raiders. They got 3 first-round picks, but we have a lot of teams that are 7-9, 8-8, 9-7. Look, 2 years ago, 7-8-1. Last year under Bruce Arians, 8-8 with 4 left tackles, no David Johnson, 3 quarterbacks, but they were competitive. Now people will bring up the schedule, a little bit more difficult, but hey, you kind of have an idea what you're going to do going into the season. Now it's just a matter of when those games are. When's your bye week, who's your opener, or how many nationally televised games you get. But this league is set up for parity. And the fact is we have 7 new playoff teams. Usually it's 4 or 5. We have 7. We had 2 teams go from worst to first. So it's possible. Now we look in the division with a healthy Jimmy Garoppolo and a healthy San Francisco lineup, they should be improved. Seattle, as long as they have Carroll and Russell Wilson, you can plug them in for 9 or 10 wins. They really take care of business at home. And the Rams, nobody's really found a way to stop them. Maybe cold weather with Goff's hands. And, back in the day when Fisher was in the division, we had Todd Bowles and Betcher. This is known for defense. It's completely changed now. You look at the head coaches and the quarterbacks in this division, you don't want to be the 4th team in the conversation.
Yeah, overall, the Cardinals were outscored by 200 points cumulative throughout the entire season. That is that lack of competitive that Michael Bidwell brought up, and also general manager Steve Keim addressed as well.
When you look at the point differential and how we led the NFL in that area, very disappointing. And, at the end of the day, we're all held accountable for this. I mean, there's certain areas where I have to look at our football operations and areas where we can make those improvements. But, again, when we look back to the season and the disappointment it was, we ultimately felt like it was unacceptable.
And the offensive numbers are just staggering. In a day and age in which teams appear to be scoring at will, moving the football up and down the field, the Cardinals could not. They were finished last in nearly every statistical category, including the following per-game averages: total yards, rushing yards, passing yards, first downs, third down percentage, time of possession, and points.
The only category they were not dead last, they were finished 31st in total plays.
Total plays.
The only other team was the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, and that
But otherwise, 32nd across the board, except for the one category, and that's total plays per game. And we know that was an issue. Time of possession, not getting off on third down. That's going to happen when you obviously, a team goes on a 10, 12, 14 play drive, and they're able to punch it in. Well, your offense is sitting on the sidelines. They can't score until they get the ball back.
And a lot of that is because the ineffectiveness of Sam Bradford. He gets benched after 3 games, so now you're forced to play a rookie maybe before he's ready. Your offensive line is shuffling. It appears to be on a weekly basis. But at the same time, and it was addressed during Monday's press conference, that's up to the coaches then to figure out a way. And we did see the Cardinals score first 7 times this season, because I went back and looked. So there was a way, and then after that is like, well, what happened? And what adjustments were being made against the offense? What adjustments were not being made with that offense to correct the counter adjustment, if you will, because it's a back and forth chess match during the entire course of a ball game, and that just wasn't happening, at least in the eyes of the decision makers.
Well, I mean, listen, if you're going to open up a business, you're going to hire somebody that can handle your finances. In other words, he may not be your guy. Somebody may introduce you to somebody. He's going to really help with your analytics. But then you're going to say, I work with this guy. He's got a good work ethic, and maybe that was Al Holcomb. But Wilkes obviously felt that he needed to bring some guys here with him, whether he worked with them in the past, and I'm sure coaches were calling on their behalf. He just didn't hire really a good staff, not deep at certain positions. And, obviously Mike McCoy came under fire, and rightfully so. Bradford, he was struggling, and Bradford's been in like 4 or 5 different systems. It was too confusing, too complex. And then they get Leftwich in there, and he's going to a gunfight with a butter knife. Just based on, they try to open up the edges a little bit more, mass protection, 6- and 7-man protection. They try to get David Johnson involved. So from that standpoint, I mean, there was just too many games where right about the second quarter or the third quarter, you just knew they weren't coming back in that game. And that could be demoralizing, and players, people are going to say, well, these guys are professionals. Yeah, but it's human nature to look at the scoreboard and go, we're not coming back today.
Even if it was a 10-point deficit,
sure.
Or even if you just needed to score a touchdown with 5 minutes to go, based off what we've seen all season, or based off what we've seen so far through the first 3 quarters, how do you see that team moving the ball?
And I was encouraged what they did in Kansas City. I mean, 26 points, that team was rolling. Now, when you get to December and January, the weather is a factor, obviously, if you play outside. But you have to be able to run the ball and stop the run. And then when you get in the red zone, you better capitalize on touchdowns versus field goals. This team, their margin for error was so small where they had to get a special teams touchdown or a defensive touchdown.
Or wait for the other team to make a mistake.
Right, exactly. But that's how the field was tilted, though. You're basically swimming upstream the entire time because you're trailing, and you know that you don't have the firepower on offense or the players health-wise. So, I mean, it is what it is, but they were not competitive. And I was encouraged in the Packers game.
Yes.
I mean,
Chiefs, Packers.
Yeah. Even in Minnesota. I didn't think they were going to win that game. We knew that Mike Zimmer was going to bring the double-A gap blitz. I mean, Josh has never seen that before. You can look at it on film until the bullets are flying. You're not. I mean, I thought they were somewhat competitive. Sometimes these games, it's a 10-point game, and then you find out you lose by 17. That's a late score there. So, but this league is so set up for being competitive, and we just didn't see that from start to finish.
Yeah, offensively, certainly, and then defensively, the number's not as bad, but the one number that was absolutely horrendous was the rush defense and the inability to stop the other team from running down this team's throat, so to speak. Almost 155 yards per game the Cardinals allowed on the ground. The next closest, the Dolphins, at just over 145 yards a game. And, of course, when we talked about it on whether the change from a 3-4 to a 4-3 factored into that, that was a question asked of Steve Keim.
At the end of the day, that you have to cater to your defensive strengths and put your personnel in the right position to succeed. And again, I don't want to get into all the details, but I mean, it was pretty easy to see that whether it was combination coverage busts or things that went on every level of the defense were concerning. And the fact that it didn't get right sooner than later, that was a real sticking point.
The ability to adjust, and I don't know how agreeable Wilks and his staff was, especially defensively, because every single week it's happened again on a Sunday. What can you do differently? Well, we're just got to pound it in. And to a certain extent, I agreed with that. Because it is a new system, and even though you've got all off season and training camp, you don't really know sometimes what you have until you start playing real football when games start to count, and then you can make some adjustments. But I don't think, you get to week 7, week 8, and you're still having these issues. Well, then you need to kind of figure out something else, even if it's, tearing things up and then starting scratch, for lack of a better word, just because you haven't been able to show what you're trying to teach them to do works. It's not. And at that point, it became, week in and week out. Once again, another 100 yards and 150 yards. And
to back up running backs.
Yes, guys. And
games.
And even C.J. Anderson signed on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and all of a sudden rushes for over 100 yards that only a couple of days later. So the rush defense really just
tackling.
Yeah, and that as much as everyone harps on the offense, the defense too, just by the tone of voice with Keim and just how he looked when talking about the defense seemed to bother him, if not as much, maybe even more than the offensive struggles, just because offensively
circumstances,
you knew somewhat that you were going to be limited, but defensively, there were a handful of injuries, but certainly nothing like you experienced on the offensive side.
No, we were saying in training camp, even with a healthy Bradford and a productive David Johnson, that the defense was going to have to carry their water we go back to Carson Palmer. It took him 8 weeks to kind of figure out BA's offense. And we're talking about a seasoned veteran that played in a lot of different systems. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, and it's not now that they're gone, but you hear different things like halftime adjustments. I mean, a lot of times you look at Belichick, he's on the sideline.
Those adjustments need to be made when they need to be
made.
When
the defense comes to the sidelines. Yeah. First quarter adjustments. We didn't see that from the offensive line under Ray Brown. I thought at one point Wilks would call the defense. I really did, but I don't think he wanted to step on the toes of Al Holcomb. Now, Ron Rivera, where they were 6-2 and they ended up losing like 4 or 5 in a row.
7 in a row.
7 in a row. Wow, okay. So, Washington was calling the defense there. Rivera took over at some point. If I'm Wilks at that point, now, obviously he was on the hot seat, but I'm saving my bacon and saying I'm going to make the call to the defense. And Al, you can just help me out, in the headset, what you see, because you want more eyes on what's going on. But we didn't see and I told you before, Arians would have like 3 game plans. Now, scripted plays are only first and second down. So you get it to third down in distance. Let's say you had a scripted play at play 8 and it's 3rd and 11, you're not going to run the ball. But Arians would have like 3 game plans going into a game. Now, granted, he had a lot of veterans and experienced coaches, Tom Moore, Freddie Kitchens on the staff. You throw in Byron Leftwich. So he had a wealth of knowledge in that room, including himself. And if the team didn't make the adjustments or were able to be effective, he would go to game plan number 2. And then in the third quarter, if it didn't work again, he would go to game plan number 3. They were not that advanced, and I don't know how many other teams do that, so it'd be unfair to kind of compare. But I think it's worthy of pointing out.
Cards cover 2 here on a Wednesday, coming to you from the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center, and, of course, broadcasting in our Bose QC35s, which I did not get over the holidays,
yeah.
MJ. I mean, where were
check
they?
your mail.
Oh, okay. Got lost in the mail? All right.
Yeah, blame the shipping company.
Okay. All right. I got you. 2 days ago, Wilks became the 9th one-and-done head coach since 2006. Most recently, before Monday, was Chip Kelly, who was let go by the 49ers after a 2-14 season. But certainly it's fair to ask whether one season was enough time to evaluate a head coach, Steve Wilks, or anyone. That question posed to Steve Keim.
It goes back to what Michael said. I think that at the end of the day, there's a number of things that you look at. But the fact that, again, there were a number of games we weren't competitive and didn't just didn't honestly feel like we were growing as a football team and heading in the right direction.
When you look at the number of injuries, we've talked a lot about it, but we also grade injuries not by the number of players that are on injured reserve, but the number of games lost due to injury. And last year, the year before, 2014 certainly, there were more injured players, and that's where you rely on your coaching staff, is to get the next players ready. And there were so many times in the years past where we'd sign a player on a Tuesday and they'd be playing on Sunday. And so that is the NFL. Every team faces injuries, and that's where the coaches make a real difference.
Well, let's be honest. When they were healthy, as he pointed out, they weren't playing well to begin with.
Yeah, the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, because, and again, they hired Mike McCoy because he was a former head coach, 18 years of experience, worked with Rivers and Manning, and, he was a former quarterback in college. So, but even when Andre Smith and Justin Pugh were in there, wasn't like the Cardinals were lining up running for 155 yards and David Johnson was getting, all-purpose 150 every game. That wasn't the case, though.
With regard to the injuries, and I'm guilty of it, as pointing it out, it's a fact, it's a factor. But we focus on that number 17 players on injured reserve. I went back and looked based off of Bidwell's comments. There were last season 20 players on injured reserve. Team finished 8-8. 2016, 18 players on injured reserve. Team went 7-8-1. And that speaks to the coaching aspect, next man up, which we all fell in love with when Coach Arians was here. But if you do have someone that needs to fill that spot, or all of a sudden you're forced to play someone, well, are the coaches, that position, the assistant, whomever, are they getting that player ready for that day, for that Sunday ahead? And it's pretty clear just by what we saw that the answer was no.
How long do we hear about gap integrity, gap discipline, do your job, don't freelance? I felt like we heard that the entire 4 months, right? And then we have another miscue in the secondary against the Seahawks game on the Tyler Lockett play. He was wide open. Now, they weren't playing man. I think they were playing a cover zone, so that would have been Buda Baker's guy. A lot of people thought Peterson was on that. But and I know when you're mixing and matching, but the defense, if you go back to week 1 starters, I want to say there was 8 or 9 guys that started in Seattle. So you go from week 1. Buck started in week 1.
Yep.
No Josh Bynes, no Robert Kimdichie, and Jamar Taylor. But for the most part, they had the same defense. And then when they brought in Swearinger and he was inactive, but Trey Boston, they signed the first day of training camp, and he was a Wilkes guy. Steve and the scouting department brought him in a couple times in June. He wasn't happy with the offer. He got nervous. He took the offer, but he was a Wilkes guy because he played. And then you look at Ben Wickery. He's no longer on the roster. Jamar Taylor, they made a trade for. But I think if you look at it, I want to say there was only 3 guys that started in week 1 that did not start in week 17. So you would think they would have gotten better as the season progressed.
There was more consistency on the defensive end. But
because how many combinations do we have on the O-line?
10.
Okay.
In 16 games.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's tough to win.
Bottom line, team didn't win enough or show enough improvement, according to the man that only matters to, team president Michael Bidwell.
It was down to, as I said, wins and losses, the way we were performing. We a year ago finished the season with the 6th best defense in the league. Today we finished with the 20th. We went backwards in a number of different areas. I didn't feel comfortable in the plan going forward that it would turn us around, and felt like it was in our best interest to move forward in a different direction.
Yeah, and when Todd Bowles got here, the defense was ranked in the top 5 against the run, points allowed, maybe even top 5 rush defense. And I've been hard on Betch just because I think sometimes total yards is misleading. Teams go from the 20 to 20. What do you do in the red zone, though? I think it's pretty similar. But in fairness to Betch, James Betcher, they give up 89.4 yards per game average last year. That is night and day from this year.
Yeah, you heard Bidwell say different directions. So now the question becomes here, what is that direction? And this is what we can tell you on what's been reported so far here, at least 3 days into this coaching search, is that the Cardinals have scheduled interviews with 4 different people: Saints assistant head coach, tight ends coach Dan Campbell, former Dolphins head coach Adam Gase, former Texas Tech head coach, and now current USC offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury, and Rams quarterback coach Zach Taylor. Now, according to Adam Schefter of ESPN, Gase's interview with the Cardinals was actually today, and then coming up this weekend on Saturday, according to Albert Breer of SI.com and Ian Rappaport of NFL Network. Taylor will be speaking with the Cardinals on Saturday. As far as Campbell and Kingsbury, those are just nothing scheduled. At least nothing has been reported on when the Cardinals will speak to those. But those are 4 names that we know of definitely, at least according to reports, that are in the picture. Now, the other 2 names that we've heard associated with this opening are Eric Bieniemy, the Chiefs offensive coordinator, and Mike McCarthy, the former Packers head coach. According to Ian Rappaport, Bieniemy has, quote, elected to not take the Cardinals interview, unquote. He is interviewing with the Bengals, Buccaneers, Dolphins, and Jets. Now, with Bieniemy, MJ, and you know this, but you might want to fill in everyone else listening here on Cards Cover 2. The Chiefs are in the playoffs. They have the first round bye, so Bieniemy is allowed, free, to interview for other head coaching openings. He has chosen those 4. Now, maybe he would have loved to have talked to the Cardinals and become had 5, but maybe 5's too many. And with schedules and travel, it just didn't fit. So we don't know why. I mean, you can make claims or try to figure things out, but we don't know officially why Bieniemy has chosen not to speak with the Cardinals.
And that same would apply to Dan Campbell. They have a bye this week. They have a first overall seed. So let's start with Bieniemy. I think when you use your agents or work in the phones, and maybe they think that those are the 4 best options, you don't want to try to squeeze in one more. Now, when it comes to Bieniemy, Matt Nagy was there last year, and he took over the play calling. Bieniemy, if you watch him on the sidelines, Craig, him and Andy Reid, when the defense is on the field, I think Bieniemy's in charge of the running game coordinator, and they must have a passing game coordinator there. So Bieniemy, he actually signals the play into the quarterback, but him and Andy Reid are on the same page when it comes to play calling. So Andy gives him the call. He asks him, what does he see? Do we think we should run the ball here? So he does have limited play calling because that's what everyone's looking for, the next head coach that can play call, like Sean Payton and Sean McVay, just to name a few. So when you look at that, I just think for him and his agent, you'd love to knock it out because a lot of these meetings, whether they're going to be hired or not, are gathering information. They did a really good job last year with Pat Shurmur. They got the lowdown on all 3 free agent quarterbacks, Bridgewater, Case Keenum, and Sam Bradford. They talked to John DeFilippo from the standpoint of about Nick Foles. So a lot of it's gathering information. Now, Dan Campbell, he comes from the Bill Parcells School of Coaching. He was an interim head coach in Miami. He's more offense. Now, he's never called plays, but you got to think he's learned something from Sean Payton. He's the assistant head coach coaching tight ends. He's a guy that can command the room. Again, hard coaching. He's respected. Players, they look at him because he played the game, so he has that going for himself. But again, he's a guy that you can interview. As for Kingsbury, he recently took a job at USC. He's going to meet with the Jets and supposedly the Cardinals. Again, gathering information. Maybe he takes over for Clay Helton next year at USC. Maybe he's a wanted man because he coached Patrick Mahomes. He got other quarterbacks. You have those quarterbacks.
His list of quarterbacks is quite impressive. Case Keenum, Patrick Mahomes, Johnny Manziel, Baker Mayfield, briefly before Mayfield transferred out of Texas Tech, and then David Webb as well.
So you definitely want to get in front of him, gather information. Maybe now, when the Cardinals make this hire, they're hoping this guy's here for the next 5 to 7 years. You don't want to keep doing this, obviously. So they're gathering information. Now, Zach Taylor. Earlier on the Red Sea Report. Thank you. I was thinking about the Big Red Rage. We don't do that show, but you should listen to it.
Absolutely, every Thursday.
He actually called plays the second half of the season in Miami, so he does have limited play calling. Now he's the quarterback's coach. If somebody wants to hire him as a coordinator, I'd be curious to see what Sean McVay does because Sean McVay wants to get his coaching tree going. Now, Michael Bidwell has when you go in there with your list, and if this guy's under contract, I don't care if it's a promotion or not, unless you got reassurances that they're going to let him out of his contract. They don't deal with that because all these guys go in there with these names, and they're like, How many of those guys are under contract? 3. Well, take them off the list. Start over again. So that'd be interesting. And then Adam Gase, scheduled to be here today. To me, he's probably on paper the perfect fit. Young. We're all looking for the next McVay.
Has experience.
Kyle Shanahan. You know, he's a guy that's worked with Peyton Manning. He obviously has been a head coach play caller. He's young. He's 36 years old, I want to say.
40.
40 is? Okay. Wow, I didn't think he was that old. You could see his demeanor on the sidelines. He's pretty animated throughout the games. I would compare him more to Kyle Shanahan. But on paper, he checks all the boxes.
And his offensive coordinator stints, you mentioned the Broncos that year in 2013 is when they set the single-season NFL scoring record as far as most points with 606, and that was with Peyton Manning.
No, I was going to say, he dealt with Jay Cutler,
Oh,
so
yeah.
he can do a lot of quarterbacks out there.
Yeah, the Bears and Broncos for Adam Gase. And then the other name that everyone was real high on just because of his availability and the fact that the Packers let him go, Mike McCarthy. And according to Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network, McCarthy, quote, declined the Cardinals' advances, unquote. And there was an interesting follow-up on there from Rob Demoski, who covers the Packers for ESPN, because perhaps, or he speculated, Rob did, that maybe family concerns has eliminated the Cardinals from McCarthy's consideration, because he is speaking with the Browns and Jets, according to reports. But McCarthy has his wife has 2 high school-age boys, and they want to make sure that they finish their high school in Green Bay. You go to Cleveland, you go to New York. It's closer to go back and forth as opposed to Phoenix. So perhaps that factors in on why McCarthy is not, or did not at least reportedly accept to speak with the Cardinals.
Yeah, now he married a gal from Arizona. He got married here at the Royal Palm, so there is some connection in Arizona, but obviously when you got her 2 kids getting ready to finish high school, it makes sense. Now, he could sit out the entire year and collect $8 million.
Yeah, that's not bad work. If you know you're gonna get that money without having to do anything, now all of a sudden, if you're a team trying to entice him to say, okay, get back into the grind, that's a hefty paycheck that you're going to have to write. Now, of course, there'd be offset in order to reach that 8.
Yeah.
But you're going to have to convince him hard to make sure that you, without doing anything, you're guaranteed $8 million.
Yeah, and I mean, I think obviously your agents do all the dirty work. Okay, what jobs could open next year? Is Mike Tomlin, is that going to be a job that's going to open? You know, there's going to be a surprise. There's always a surprise every single year. You know, so it'd be interesting if he's, because on paper you would think the Browns, talent-wise, you know, a quarterback that passed the eye test from day one in Baker Mayfield. And then you got Sam Darnold. They got a ton of cap space. Mike McCagnon gets a chance to hire a new head coach, a general manager there. So does he sit out? Or, you know, he's kind of a lifer. So when you miss a year, like Jack Del Rio's been going on all these excursions and vacations, well, his phone's not ringing. Mike McCarthy.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, Mike McCarthy and probably Josh McDaniels are probably the number one guys because, you know, just based on play calling, Aaron Rodgers, I got to think the Packers' job is intriguing from that standpoint alone.
You bring up McDaniels, and I don't know if the Cardinals have any interest, but
Zero.
But the one thing with him though is he had a job last year, and then said, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to go back to New England." There has to be some hesitancy with NFL teams if you want to roll the dice with McDaniels again, because there's no question he's got a great offensive mind. But as a head coach, maybe not head coach material. And then, of course, the flip-flopping. That's, you know, gets egg on your face. Of course, it worked out well for Indianapolis.
Yeah, with Frank Reich.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to have Andrew Luck.
That's true.
Now, the thing there is when you start looking at it, the NFL changed the rule now. Before, you can negotiate in between the conference championship games and the Super Bowl. Now you can come to an agreement. So you can't
It's the
back
Josh
out.
McDaniels rule.
It's the Josh McDaniels rule. They interviewed him last year along with Brian Flores. So they got in front of Josh McDaniels. I was told that he's not on the list right now.
Well, the search for a new Cardinals head coach, how long it lasts, it's not going to last too long, but certainly the Cardinals are doing their due diligence, and we'll follow it along here on Cards Cover 2 throughout and try to keep you up to date on all the comings and goings as far as the names that are being reported out there.
All right, you and I have gone back and forth. I think you do hire the most qualified candidate. I want to know who his coordinators are. I want to know some of his position coaches, including the offensive line, but if you look at the names that have trickled out, they're all offensive-minded head coaches that could call their own plays.
Now, when the Cardinals were in this position a year ago, it was pretty evenly split between offense, defense, and there was one special teams guy on that list as well. But, typically when things don't go well and you have to do it again, you usually go the opposite direction.
Yes, I would agree with that.
But and I understand that aspect.
Like you go from Arians, who was held accountability board, but then you go with a guy like Wilkes, where he's going to find guys for certain things that maybe Arians allowed to let go.
Yeah, if you have someone who's too strict, then you go more lenient, and if you're too lenient, then you go more strict. You kind of do the opposite. But I just don't want to see this team eliminate defensive-minded or just candidates that maybe don't have that offensive background, because you find your coordinators, your quarterbacks coach, wide receivers coach, offense, whatever it is. If you have that full staff, then you can make a better decision, a better judgment on whether that's a quality head coach.
Now, we haven't heard about Todd Bowles. I know everyone would line up at the airport right now if he was going to be the defensive coordinator, because he knows the personnel. He knows the inner workings of the franchise here with Michael and Steve. Now, I would love to interview Todd Bowles from a standpoint of who are your coordinators, okay? Because we know he knows the personnel. He's the one that took Dale Buchanan from a safety and moved him to a hybrid linebacker. He's well-respected around the league. Guys like playing for him. Guys would be excited. I just right now it looks like they're going after a former head coach, offensive-minded, but I'm still keeping Todd Bowles on the radar. Now, he's still getting paid by the Jets, so you can offset that. Does he sit out a year? I don't know that, but I know he did sell his house here, but I'm sure he can come back here and buy another house in the East Valley.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting, fun, and maybe even a little chaotic trying to figure out just what the Cardinals intend to do as far as filling that head coaching vacancy, and we'll do our best to keep up with it here on Cards Cover 2 as we broadcast from the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center, and, of course, doing so in our Bose QC35s. And before we let the Bird Gang sound off here on a Wednesday, a reminder using the hashtag CardsCover2, hashtag CardsCover2. We do need to let you know about what Chandler Jones did earlier today, and we all know that the last 2 weeks of the regular season he committed a $20,000 donation to Phoenix Children's Hospital for every sack he recorded. Well, he only had one sack, and that was in the regular season finale against Seattle, but he announced that he is doubling his donation, not $20,000, but $40,000 to Phoenix Children's Hospital. So tip of the cap to Chandler Jones for that, and very much appreciated by PCH as well. They tweeted out a response, quote, "Whoa, thank you, Chandler Jones. We're blown away by your support. You're making a difference for Arizona's kids!" Exclamation point, unquote. So again, I mentioned at the start of the show, his best move of the season comes after the season. A lot of these guys do stuff that we don't publicize or doesn't get out in the open. But Chandler Jones giving $40,000 to Phoenix Children's Hospital.
Yeah, he didn't have to do that, and obviously it's a nice gesture. And we've done stuff in the past with Phoenix Children's Hospital. I know the Cardinals, that's one of their charities. And if you go there, it's just it's heart-wrenching. You see these kids, and they bring a teddy bear to them, and they're thrilled. They have a game room for them. So there's a lot of great organizations and fundraisers in the Valley. But that, to me, is one of the and we're talking about hearts and just kids living with tubes, and so just a great gesture on his part. He didn't have to do it, but he doubled it, and props to him for doing that.
Although, as Darren Urban noted on EasyCardinals.com, there was a second sack recorded. It was wiped out. His strip sack that Patrick Peterson scored was wiped out by a penalty. So perhaps maybe it was an acknowledgement of that as well.
Well, the bottom line is $40,000.
Exactly, to Phoenix Children's Hospital.
Exactly.
Also, the Cardinals late on Monday, first roster moves of 2019. They re-signed 8 players to future contracts. All these players from the practice squad offensive lineman Justin Evans, Will House, quarterback Charles Knopf, cornerback Jonathan Moxey, Dietrich Nichols, linebacker Pete Robertson, offensive lineman Coleman Shelton, and running back Brandon Wilds. Of course, Nichols we've seen on and off as far as the active roster has been concerned, and Knopf was active for one game earlier this season. So there are some names there that maybe not too familiar with as far as the fan is concerned, but these are players that the Cardinals believe in that could be in the mix in 2019. For whatever role, starter role, reserve, or just in case, because you always need guys to practice, and then you need that depth as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you highlighted those two guys. Charles Knopf, I mean, he's a great third string guy. I mean, you can see that they have a really good quarterback room with obviously Rosen and a veteran like Mike Glennon, and then Dietrich Nichols. He's kind of come and gone. Not the most athletic guy, but he's a guy that's not afraid to go out there and stick his his nose in the fan. So those two guys stick out, but you're allowed to expand your roster to 90 in the offseason, so you're going to see a lot of this. And anybody that gets cut between now and going into week 4, the Cardinals will have the first claim, and they've already got a Pro Bowl player out there, and DJ Swearinger.
Yeah, and of course, Farrell Cooper as well is on the roster.
He's in the mix, yeah.
We had a great punt return in Seattle on Sunday. All right, without further ado, let's hear what the Bird Gang is sounding off here on Wednesday. And just to guess, MJ, that a lot of it will have to do with this head coaching search. But let's start with Twitter. And our loyal follower at Cardinals_31 wants to know, with 2 potential head coach candidates turning down interviews with the Cardinals, do you think the one and done with Steve Wilks could be a reason, or would you attribute it to other factors?
Other factors. I mean, if you're Eric Bieniemy, first of all, you're property of the Kansas City Chiefs, and he must feel that those 4 teams could be an option, or maybe he's got a realistic chance. We've been talking about it for the last 46 minutes about the Cardinals looking like they want to go offensive-minded. That doesn't mean it's going to be the scenario. So Mike McCarthy, he's in a sweet spot right now. He's a wanted man, Jets, Browns, or he sits out the year and makes $8 million. And I'm sure he's going to want some say in personnel matters, and some teams say, you're the head coach, you control the 46, you have input on the 53 and the roster, but ultimately your job is to coach a football team.
These are coveted jobs, but there are
There's only
reasons.
32 of them, so they're going to have to get somebody.
Yeah, but there are reasons why
Yes.
why you get turned down, and it's not always just because, well, that's not desirable. It's
His agent probably said, look,
it's
based on
location,
Arizona had
family. I'm sure there's a lot.
and those 4 options, maybe he feels like are a better situation. I mean, again, some of these interviews are just gathering information, meet and greet, pick their brains, try to find out what they're doing, and try to take it and bring it to the new staff.
Staying with Twitter, user wants to know about the potential of Byron Leftwich being brought back whenever a new head coach is hired, as far as retaining his position either at offensive coordinator or even quarterbacks coach.
Yeah, they haven't announced anything. I would think 5 or 6 guys, maybe 5, would be considered. Now, they all had to put suits on and interview with Steve Wilks. And ironically enough, for coincidence, they all came from BA staff. Now, Cam Turner, he's a guy that was in the booth. He's more of an analytics guy. He is Ron Turner's son. Norv Turner's brother, Ron Turner, was a longtime coach at Illinois. He was also the defensive coordinator with the Bears. They like him. So, but anyways, whoever they hire is going to have to interview these guys again. But we could see some holdovers from Bruce Arians' staff. I don't think we're going to see only one guy, maybe 2 guys on special teams, and that will be Jeff Rogers.
Checking Instagram, user wants to know as far as how different this year's head coaching search is from last year's search.
I think it's a reverse. I'm going after the best qualified candidate, a guy that can lead men, command the room, respect in the room. Now they're going offense, so I would think it's a little bit different. But again, they went to Philadelphia, interviewed their defensive coordinator in Schwartz and Flip. They went to Minnesota. They went to New England. So I think it's a different approach of what they want, and now it's a matter of who checks those boxes.
I also think they're operating a little bit quicker.
Yes.
And not to say that they need to make an announcement tomorrow or this week or next week.
I'm
but
sure
to
they
make
would
sure,
like to find a guy
Yes.
that they want to bring back for a second interview. Now, the good news for Adam Gase and some of these other guys, they're coming here. So now you can show them the facility, all the upgrades. You can take them to the stadium. You can show them the locker room. You can watch film with them. So a lot of times you're going on the road and you're cramped in a hotel room and you're trying to gather as much information here. Meet and greet, take them out for lunch, maybe dinner, maybe he spends the night. So this is more getting to know the person, but also we want to know the player, the scheme, and what he's going to bring to the table.
Last question. Instagram user wants to know, this is more about the news of the day outside of the Arizona Cardinals. Should the Cardinals make a play for Antonio Brown if the Steelers shop him?
No. First of all, this is the offseason. This stuff always happens. I mean,
he's not going to be the first one to.
No, and the whole Le'Veon Bell thing, and teams don't like distractions. But if they cut him, it's $21 million against the cap. They would save $1 million. They're a better football team with him and Smith-Schuster and some of these other guys they have on the roster. So maybe there's one team out there, but I don't see the Cardinals giving a guy $19 million a year that's 30 years old and he's never happy.
No question there's a need at wide receiver.
No,
though.
there is, but there's other options.
Yes, and you got to be fiscally responsible as well, especially with as many holes as you have.
He was supposedly he needed to take an MRI. They don't know if he took the MRI. Tomlin played dumb or he didn't know. He left at halftime during the game. So, again, we've gone through the diva wide receivers. Right now, he's the poster boy.
Appreciate everyone, all Bird Gang, sounding off here on a Wednesday using the hashtag CardsCover2. Hashtag CardsCover2. Or again, if we did not get to your question here this afternoon, we'll do it again on Friday. So keep them coming because we know everyone is interested in what is going to happen, especially with the coaching search, because that is priority number one. And then after that, it becomes coaching staff. And then, of course, what is happening with the rest of the roster here. And we'll be following it all here from the Dignity Health Arizona Cardinals Training Center. That's going to wrap up this edition of a Cards Cover 2. Special thanks to those behind the scenes, Tim Delaney, Jim Alejandro, Devin Henry, and Brandon Natus. For my partner, Mike Jurecki, I'm Craig Grialou. We'll talk to you on Friday here on Cards Cover 2.